Trey Yingst is Fox News foreign correspondent. He is also the author of a brand new book, Black Saturday, an unfiltered account of the October 7th attack on Israel and the war in Gaza. Trey's joining us right now live from southern Israel, and I'm honored to have you on this day today, Trey. Thanks for being on the Will Cain Show.
Yeah, Will, thanks for having me.
So, Trey, I've read through the book. It is heart-pulsing. I mean, it is a minute-by-minute account, not just of your own personal experience, but obviously all those you've managed to talk to before and after the events of October 7th. You know, you begin the book really talking about how you were woken up that morning and how you experienced it. You know, I think if anybody wants to feel, not just know, but feel what it was like, they need to check out Black Saturday. So I think I'll start kind of broad, Trey. 1 year later, what moment do you feel that stays with you? What is the moment from that day forward that's staying with Trey Yingst?
It's tough because when I look back on this first week of coverage following the October 7th massacre, a lot of it's a blur. And I tried my best to take photos and take notes in preparation for writing this book, Black Saturday. But my team and I arrived in southern Israel on the morning of October 7th as the massacre was unfolding. We're back a year later reporting from these communities today. And you can see the house behind me was one of those impacted by the Hamas attack when these militants crossed from Gaza into southern Israel. And actually, interestingly, in the book, one of the most difficult days that I chronicle is a time in a community called Be'eri. And it's a community that I'm sitting in right now. And we arrived here with the army in the days after the October 7th massacre, and we saw bodies everywhere. This area was filled with dead residents and militants that really, it's hard to put into words, Will, how horrific the scenes were. Because we went into these houses like the one behind me, and we saw the aftermath of a massacre where people were slaughtered. The blood-stained floors, the broken windows and doors where people were sheltering in their mamads, their bomb shelters, when these gunmen broke in. And so I think that coming to this community personally was one of the hardest for me. And that's part of the reason that I came back today, a year later. And I want to continue documenting this so that people know what happened here and they know about the horrors of October 7th.
That's just stunning to me, Trey, because, you know, I'll be honest, just a few hours ago, I was reading your chapter on that kibbutz right there. And you talked to us, those readers of Black Saturday, about the people. You let us know who they were, you know, and to see you sitting now in front of one of those homes and what I just got done reading about and what happened inside that home, it's really stunning. You know, one thing I would ask about where you're sitting right now, Trey, is help me understand that kibbutz, because I also know I don't ever want to turn one person or one community's personal tragedy into a symbol, but it also tells a larger story. And that is like, who's living there? How big was that? You know, I'm going to use a different word than kibbutz because sometimes I don't think that translates well to someone listening in America. You know, it's a village. It's a very, very small town, right? On the outpost, almost on the frontier. Can you just give me a little context of like, not just what happened there, but the people it happened to on October 7th?
Yeah, absolutely. The kibbutzim, the communities along the border, are very small towns, villages of just a few hundred people each. And they live in a way that's quite a simple life, actually. They share many resources. Some of them pool funding, and they live in a way that you would hear a small village hundreds of years ago lived. And they do that for many reasons. But in this area, they're very connected to the land and to their community. And so they choose to live in an area that, despite the fact historically came under rocket and mortar fire, was quite a beautiful place to live. Rolling hills and bike paths and places where you could walk to the store and you could walk to your neighbor's house. And the people, especially of this community in Be'eri, were known for being peace activists, interestingly. They are some of the most left of Israeli society, people who would spend their free time protesting the Israeli blockade on Gaza, driving Palestinian kids to Israeli hospitals. And they were some of the first hit on the morning of October 7th. And Be'eri represents, I think, the best part of Israeli society. The idea that coexistence is possible, that peace is possible. They are not people who hate or people who were extremely nationalistic. They were people who were accepting, who were willing to live alongside Palestinians and hope for a better future. And I think that Be'eri again represents the good of this society. And unfortunately, they were hit one of the hardest on the morning of October 7th.
You know, there's the obvious dichotomy of the community you just described. And again, I was reading about, you just told us about the blood on the floor, the blood on the walls. But there's also another interesting dichotomy you described that happened that day, in that you have there what I would presume, Trey, is maybe a politically liberal society, but a religiously conservative one, I would think, and, maybe some people that tend to be on the older end of the demographic. And then all of a sudden you walk us through these people fleeing the music festival. And I think the lady's name is Yamin, who comes running in, right? And you know what just stuck in my head, Trey? She was dressed skimpy. Like, we've seen images of the music festival that day, and these were kids having a, 20s, 30s, having a big time. And then that's kind of some of the first that community encounters. All of a sudden, these people running into their community, knocking on doors, dressed, whatever, party, scantily clad. And then not long after that, it sounds like 10 minutes later, then horror.
Yeah, this story of Yasmin, who with her boyfriend Tal came from the music festival that was actually just down the road from here. And ultimately they arrive at this older couple's house and they bang on the door and the couple lets them in. They make them coffee and ask them what's happening. And they're trying to piece together what's going on. And ultimately they hide in the mamad, the bomb shelter of the house, before it's stormed by Hamas. And it is a moment in the book that is challenging, I think, to read, because it was challenging to learn about.
Right.
Ultimately, the boyfriend of Yasmin is killed. And it's just another example of how quickly people's lives change. They were at a music festival in the morning, and by the afternoon, the boyfriend was dead, and Yasmin was traumatized after being a hostage for a period of time. Hamas had taken her and other residents into a house and held them until ultimately the Israeli military arrived and there was a firefight. And again, this is just one story out of thousands that took place on that horrific day.
So that's a transition in asking you about the music festival, which probably has gotten the most attention. And, not undeservedly. If the numbers are 1,200 dead, I think some quarter of that, 360 about, was from the music festival. I started the interview, Trey, asking you about sort of what you feel, what you've hung on to a year into this. You had a moment in the book where you talk about when you got access to the music festival, and you got access to the music festival like that kibbutz before it was quote unquote cleaned, meaning you saw bodies. And I think you're pointing to the bar. There's a bar where a lot of people got killed at the music festival, and the IDF guys yell at you, no cameras, no photos. And your job is to document, you said. And you may or may not use it on TV or social media, but you ended up using your phone to continue recording. But you said in that, maybe just only to remind me, to remind yourself of what you saw. And I don't know, even though all of us have seen so much, and largely through the words and pictures you've shared with us, Trey, I don't even know if in the end, I know it doesn't. I've been to some, not what you've seen, but natural disasters. It's just hard to communicate, right? And I don't know what you saw, but it just struck me, you having to say to yourself, I need to remember this.
Yeah, at so many of these places, we saw horrific scenes. And when we had arrived to the music festival, they had actually cleared all of the bodies out of there, but there were still remains on site when we got there. And in a way, this was in some way even more graphic, because these were the burned remains of the festival goers. And these likely soldiers, first responders, a mixture of people, were putting the remains into bags. And they told us, don't photograph it, don't take any video. And I use my cell phone at my waist and I take some video. And like I said, it was more just so that I could remember to tell people about that, because in the course of this reporting, your brain sees so many horrific things that, one, it blocks out a lot of things, and two, they're just such long hours on the front lines that you can't remember everything. And so I use my phone and my camera as almost a virtual diary. so that I can
Yeah.
go back and say, okay, on this morning at this time, we saw this. And then I can remember to tell people about it so that people don't forget about that horrific day and the aftermath that we captured.
So I'm going to step back from the stories for just a moment. Again, I don't give gratuitous endorsements. I think you will learn, and again, you'll feel so much in Black Saturday. Um, I want to ask you a couple, I guess there would be logistical questions, one out of curiosity and one which is a bit more political. But the curiosity one, so take me to the music festival. One thing I've always wondered, Trey, I never really fully got my arms around. It's chaos, clearly. Some leave, some don't. Some that do leave, it actually doesn't work out for them. Is that because of traffic or where they chose to flee to? Because you talk about a dairy farm where a lot of people fled and that, they were killed at the dairy farm. Did Hamas just surround the music festival? Was there tactical? I think for a lot of people, you sit there and you go, what would I have done? And I know that's not the right question, but it's almost a human nature question. Like, how could people have left once this started? How was there any commonality to the survivors?
There wasn't really a commonality among the survivors. There was one thing that I noticed among the interviews that I conducted, and that's largely that a lot of the people who kept going and kept moving survived. And I think that the initial instinct, because it was a rocket attack and that's what everyone thought it was at first, some people did what you are told to do, which is go to a shelter. And they rushed to the shelters on the side of the road as these rockets were incoming. And Hamas stormed the shelters and threw hand grenades inside. And I remember one guy that we interviewed, he talks about being with his friend and they're drinking and having a good time. And when the attack starts, he tells him, like, let's go, we need to move. And his friend ultimately doesn't move with him and doesn't keep running. And he's killed in one of those shelters. And I think everyone had a different story. And sometimes it was just a matter of chance if they survived. One big issue was the road. There was only one road to exit the music festival. And it went two directions, but both directions ended up being blocked by Hamas. They created these roadblocks almost and killed everyone that drove toward them. And so that was one problem. There was immediate congestion. And so people got out of their cars and they started running through fields. And depending on the direction that they ran, they either were able to get to safety or they ran right into an ambush by Hamas.
Was it complete randomness, Trey, on who was killed versus who was taken hostage? Did that just depend upon the Hamas crew you ran into? Like, I mean, men and women were taken hostage. It wasn't like they were killing the men and taking the women. It was, a cross-section of people. Was that just randomness?
Yeah, it was random, and even down to the individual. There are stories in the book. One stands out, a woman named Hen from the community of Kafaraza, and her husband is killed, her daughter is killed, but she is taken hostage along with her other two children. And they were all in the same safe room, but just the way that it played out, they survived and ultimately actually were released from Gaza, and that's how I interviewed her after she was released. But it is a remarkable instance of chance and luck for many people that they survived.
So here's the other, I don't guess logistical is the right word, but this is the part that I said is a bit more political. One thing that has always confounded me, you've reported on this for a year, is how it happens. Meaning, how does it escape Israeli intelligence? They know everything, every little thing that's coming. And this is a massive thing, Trey. And it's a massive thing that happened. And I don't understand to this day how.
Yeah, it was a massive intelligence failure. There were signs that were reported and then not delivered to the right commanders. Some of these younger soldiers who were tasked with watching the border reported these things and they never made it up the chain. And I interviewed Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, for this book, Black Saturday, and he admitted it was an intelligence failure, but he didn't know. And he's the top military official in the country. He had no idea, no warning.
What about the planning? And even the ahead of time planning? I know they have spies.
And I mean, they also have communication intercepts, and that's one thing. But the other thing is that they planned in broad daylight. And even I remember this back from 2018, 2019, and we've covered this story. I've personally covered it every day for the past 6 years. And there were times over the past several years that Hamas and Islamic Jihad released these videos of them training, and they were storming houses in Gaza. And they looked like houses like the one behind me. And no one ever really made anything of it. It was like, oh, okay, they're just doing some exercises. They have a military wing. but they were training to infiltrate into Israel. And the Israelis, I mean, that was public. The Israelis saw that and they didn't act on it. And I think the one moment in the book that really stands out is I interviewed Gallant and I asked him, what were you doing that morning? And he says, I was preparing to go mountain biking. And he tells me that he learned of the attack starting not from the prime minister, not from his chief of staff, from his daughter who called him.
Wow. You take us not just through the day and the immediate aftermath of October 7th, but you do follow the war. And, you do a good job, Trey, and I want to tell you that personally, but you do a good job of bringing all sides of all of these stories, which is important, So if I ask you about the ensuing war, in Gaza, what do you think is most important from the book and from your reporting that someone knows, and I almost ask that because despite your reporting or despite how much coverage it continues to receive, the public has a tendency to turn off after the big thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, especially for something so mired in I don't want to say it's not stagnant, but like even, Ukraine, Afghanistan, we arrive at a point where the public's attention, how about this, is fatigued. And you obviously, you're not, I mean, you may be, but you continue to give us exactly what's going on. So what is it you think that we're not giving attention to from the year we've spent since October 7th?
I think the objective facts of the situation on the ground, because this is a very politically charged and emotionally charged story. And it's not my job to make people feel comfortable or make them happy. It's to inform them and educate them about the truth of what's actually happening on the ground and to hold those in power accountable for their actions. And the truth on the ground is that the October 7th massacre was the largest slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. The Israeli response to that massacre has led to the highest death toll among Palestinian civilians in the history of their people. The Israelis have completely destroyed the Gaza Strip in their campaign against Hamas. They've killed tens of thousands of civilians in the process, along with an estimated 17,000 militants from Hamas and Islamic Jihad. But that's an uncomfortable reality. But it's the truth. We've been inside Gaza 5 separate times with the Israeli military on embeds. They are not allowing journalists free access to Gaza. We rely on the information that we receive from Palestinian journalists who are risking their lives on the ground. And more than 100 of them have been killed in the efforts to gather those images. And I think those are the things that people don't talk about as much that they should be talking about. Because war is not pretty. It is horrific. And the massacre was horrific, but the Israeli response against Gaza has also been horrific. And it's part of our role as journalists to shine light in all dark places. And that means coming to these communities before they're cleared and shining light here. And it also means shining light in Gaza to what's happening to the civilian population there. And it's trying to, the book, I think the biggest takeaway is holding two things that can be true at once. That you can call for the release of Israeli hostages. That's an objectively horrible thing, that these innocent civilians were dragged from their homes after their family members were executed. You should call for their release. But you can also call for the release, you can also call for the protection of Palestinian civilians amid the war. That civilians can be protected and hostages can be released at the same time.
And so last thing with you, Trey, then on that. So in the same way that you've shared so many details about October 7th, and this is for my own edification and for anybody watching, that I want them to be edified, to learn, to know. And by the way, I don't think knowing is apologizing for, and I don't think knowing is condemning. I think knowing is simply knowing the truth. What have you seen in sharing, like you did with the details of October 7th, from inside Gaza?
We've seen horrific things, entire neighborhoods wiped from the map, families, their entire bloodlines taken out in a single Israeli strike. And the Israelis are using very large bombs in Gaza, in some cases 2,000-pound bombs. And the statement that will be associated with that bombing is that it was a precise strike. It's very difficult to be super accurate and super precise with a weapon that large, with a piece of ammunition that large. And so that's what we've seen. We have seen entire neighborhoods destroyed. We have seen and smelled the people who are buried under the rubble. And so it's critical that we continue to report on that as well, because at the end of the day, we want to get as close to the reality as possible, gathering as much information as we can. And like you said, it doesn't mean that we we support or deny. Our role as journalists is to shine light and to gather information. And sometimes that information can be challenging for people to receive, and it can also be challenging to view, but it doesn't make it any less important.
Well, Trey, this is the only real, I don't want to say that. Yeah, I can say that. This might be the only real conversation I've had with you. Let me ask you a few questions on television. And honestly, this is obviously, it's my favorite conversation I've ever had with you. It's so candid and real, and I can't believe your background and where you're sitting in this very moment. And so I'll give you a very real compliment. This has been amazing, and the book is amazing, as has been your reporting for a year. I hope you and I can do this again. I would love for this to be an outlet where you can freely, like you, and Fox, you're free on Fox. I know that to be the case, but unstructured, to hear from you. I'd love for this to continue to be a platform for you from your phone like you are today. We don't have to have any fancy television setup, just what's real and what's true.
But, we've got that fancy television set up, so the next time, and we can even do an extended conversation, not just about this, but the whole world. I mean, we're covering this stuff every day, and I do find so much value in your reporting and your coverage, not just of the Middle East, but the whole world, and also the value in these conversations to dive deeper into these topics because it's important.
Well, I'm going to take you up on that. I'm definitely going to take you up on that. All right, Get Black Saturday. I don't give a gratuitous endorsement. It is incredible. It is out now, and it's by Trey Yingst. Trey, thank you so much for being on the Will Cain Show.
Thank you, Will.